Imagine waking up in a cold home with no electricity or sanitation, drinking a bottle of vodka and getting into a knife fight by lunchtime, all while avoiding debt collectors who are more than willing to disembowel you if you don't pay the weekly rate of the loan that you just took out so you can buy some food. This is the harsh reality of life in Tuva. Its location, terrain, historic relations with the capital, underdeveloped economy, lack of infrastructure, and abundance of alcohol and narcotics contributed to the creation of Russia's unforgivably dangerous and most isolated region. Depression, hunger, poverty, violence, they are just a fact of life for the people who live there, and it doesn't seem like it's going to get better anytime soon. The cause of this hell on earth is a perfect, multi-factor disaster, all starting with the region's extreme isolation. Today's sponsor, good friends over at Surfshark. If you spend time online, which of course you do, unless you're watching this video on VHS, no. Look, your data is being tracked, collected, and resold. It's not paranoia, it's just how the internet works. Those adverts that you see following you around the internet, it's like, wow, how does it know? Well, of course it knows. It's tracking all your data. It's kind of creepy. But Surfshark VPN, they fix that by encrypting your connection and hiding your location, so no one, not your internet provider, not advertisers, no one on those dodgy public Wi-Fi networks can see what you're doing. It also lets you access content from anywhere, no matter what country you're in. And the best part, one account covers unlimited devices. Protect your phone, your laptop, your tablet, everything, all at once. So all you need to do is go to surfshark.com/places, use the code places at checkout. You'll get 4 extra months of Surfshark VPN for free. That's surfshark.com/places, code places for the deal. Now back to today's episode. The Republic of Tuva, as it is officially known, is located in southern Siberia, bordering Mongolia to the south and stretching over more than 168,000 square kilometers, which is just a bit smaller than Uruguay. Russia. Really big. The largely mountainous region is inhabited by more than 330,000 people, more than a third of whom live in the region's capital of Kyzyl. Geographically, Tuva is incredibly isolated because of its location. Unlike Krasnoyarsk, for example, which is the closest large city to Tuva, Kyzyl and other Tuvan towns are dislocated from the rest of Russia. They are simply nowhere near any other settlement. Tuva is, so to say, the appendix of Russia. It's difficult to get to, and it was never a strategically important or economically contributing region for the country, which is why it remains isolated to this very day. Now, there's some discrepancy between Chinese and Russian calculations, but according to Russia, Kyzyl is the geographic center of Asia. On top of that, Kyzyl is almost the exact polar opposite of Point Nemo. Point Nemo is the oceanic pole of inaccessibility. It's the most isolated place from land in the entire world, with nothing but water for almost 2,000 miles in any direction. Contrasting that, Kyzyl is thousands of miles away from the closest large body of water, and it can only be accessed by land or air. The disconnect between Tuva and the rest of the country is apparent when talking to Tuvans who, when speaking about Russia, often just say it's beyond the Sayan Mountains, implying that it's not a part of their country, even if Tuva is formally a part of that country. Aside from being a literal land-based Point Nemo, the region and its inhabitants developed into a social Point Nemo as well. Around 90% of the inhabitants of Tuva are not ethnically Russian, they're Tuvan. Tuvans are a Turkic ethnic group indigenous to Siberia, and aside from Tuva, a few thousand Tuvans live in China and Mongolia. Although they speak Russian, because they live in Russia, Siberian Turkic is de facto the official language in Tuva, which obviously drives a bit of a wedge between them and the Russian population. What drives an even deeper wedge is the fact that Moscow, frankly, sees non-Russian ethnic groups as second-class citizens, something that Russian leadership has proven again and again. According to some critics and analysts, if Tuva was inhabited by Russians instead of ethnic Tuvans, the region would see much more infrastructural development. We mustn't forget that Tuva was also the penultimate region to join the Soviet Union in 1944, which means that it missed out on a fairly large piece of the USSR's modernization and industrialization pie. This is most obvious if we take a look at Tuva's energy expenditure and production. The region produces barely 10% of its annual electrical energy needs. Because of this, Russia planned to invest $500 million in Tuva's energy sector in 2022, but the country then invaded Ukraine and those funds were repurposed. According to Russian sources, Tuva also lost approximately 65% of all industrial production after the breakup of the USSR, and the region is a long way from a complete recovery. Russian leadership is not particularly interested in investing in the region to help it recover either. And even if there were no invasion of Ukraine and they had their hands free with the budget, Russia simply does not need the region of Tuva. Returning to our medical analogy, from an anatomic perspective, Tuva is a vulnerable organ with a huge caloric expenditure requiring constant maintenance, and in return it brings, well, nothing to the rest of the body. Tuva does not contribute to Russia in any meaningful way. We could ask, which was first, the low-investment chicken or the no-contribution egg, but when the line is drawn, it is clear that because of its geographic and ethnic isolation, as well as its lack of economic viability, Russia invested and continues to invest minimally in the region, resulting in extreme poverty and insanely high crime rates. More than 34% of the population in Tuva lives below the so-called survival minimum, which is almost triple the national average. This makes Tuva Russia's poorest region by far. The reason behind the region's extreme poverty lies in its lack of infrastructure and the aforementioned extreme isolation. The road network in Tuva is incredibly underdeveloped, and there is quite literally no railway. This is incredible to even think about in this day and age, as even some of the most undeveloped countries in the world have, at the very least, functional railways. But there is not a single mile of railway in Tuva at the time that we recorded this video. Now, if you live in geographically the most isolated region of the largest country on the planet, not to mention one of the most isolated regions in the world, not having access to a railway is basically bordering on a death sentence. First of all, you as a resident are physically restricted from moving. All the material goods you need on a daily basis have to be transported to you, and because of a lack of affordable transport, they are going to be much more expensive when compared to regions with a better transport network. Those goods cannot be brought via train or a ship. They have to be flown in or transported via trucks. And taking into account the huge distance between Tuva and the closest major cities in Russia, as well as the huge price of gas, it's clear why the prices of goods are so high. The lack of transport infrastructure works the other way as well. Business potential is drastically lower in Tuva because it's so expensive to move goods. Even if you found solid gold in your backyard, you'd lose it because Putin would take it all. But if you hypothetically had the opportunity at free trade, you'd have a really tough time getting your gold out of there. This is the precise cause behind Tuva's unfathomable lack of industrial development. The only viable industry sector is mining, as Tuva is home to the Ulukhem coal basin, where mining started in 1914. The issue is, the mine hasn't developed too much ever since. Even though it produced 40 million metric tons of coal in 2020, which is a bit over 9% of Russia's annual coal production, the mine is still severely underperforming. It's painfully expensive to move the mined coal, which is why the coal mine never reached its full capacity. It's almost unprofitable to buy the Tuva coal because of how much money is just wasted on transport. Way back in 2007, Vladimir Putin announced the construction of a 411-kilometer railway line that should link Tuva to Krasnoyarsk Krai, and by extension, the rest of the Russian railway network. But the railway is not yet complete, with the planned launch scheduled for 2026. Once it is completed, the railway will create at least 10,000 new jobs, and it's expected that local business will go through a bit of a resurgence, but that will be nowhere near the injection of life that this economy really needs. Aside from the aforementioned coal, there is no industry in Tuva. In 2021, the top exports, aside from coal, were zinc, copper, and lead ore, and with most of the produced food being consumed locally, there's very little agricultural exports. Another reason Tuva is so undeveloped lies, ironically, in its natural resources. First of all, since it's such a mountainous region, building roads and railways is a difficult task, and if that wasn't enough of an obstacle, Tuva is also rather prone to earthquakes, with quakes ranging from 4 to 5.5 on the Richter scale being a yearly occurrence. Perhaps even more importantly, however, Tuva is teeming with nature reserves, biospheric parks, and archaeological findings. This doesn't sound like a problem at first, but it is a massive handicap if you want to build things like roads and railways. In terms of infrastructural and industrial development, all of these spots marked on this map are obstacles that can't be moved, and that is a huge challenge for the region. By law, you can't mine coal or plant crops in a nature reserve, which means that Tuva is, in a way, held back by its own natural beauty. With that in mind, you would logically think, well, if they have so many nature reserves and archaeological findings, the place should be booming with tourists, right? Well, no, because, as we've said many times, getting there is really hard. Getting to Russia in general is a challenge because, in case you haven't noticed, the country is currently busy with an invasion and it's not exactly welcoming to foreigners. That being said, if you manage to cross the Russian border, the best way to get to Kyzyl would be on one of the 3 daily flights from Moscow, Novosibirsk, or Krasnoyarsk, which is the closest large city to Kyzyl. Kyzyl is also connected to Krasnoyarsk and, by extension, the rest of the country through the P257 highway. It's ill-advised to travel by highway unless absolutely necessary, though, because Kyzyl is simply far too far away that it's going to take you days to get anywhere. For example, the trip from Kyzyl to Krasnoyarsk is more than 800 kilometers long, which is like driving from Warsaw to Budapest. The difference is, if you drive from Warsaw to Budapest, at least you're getting to Budapest. Getting to Krasnoyarsk is just the first stop if you want to get anywhere else in Russia. Getting to Moscow, for example, is a 4,606-kilometer trip, and with the gas prices reaching astronomical figures in Russia, driving is simply not an option. To conclude, no, Tuva doesn't get too many tourists, once again thanks to isolation and a lack of traffic infrastructure, and this very damning brush paints the entire region the same tasteless, underdeveloped color. With everything that was said over the last way too many minutes in mind, it's not difficult to see that there is not a single industrial sector that's doing well in Tuva. Because of that, according to a recent study by the pro-Kremlin All-Russia Popular Front, Tuva is Russia's poorest and most indebted region. The unemployment rate peaked after the fall of the Soviet Union at more than 25% in the early 2000s, dropping to about 17% in 2020 and even further to 4.9% in 2023. But that was for a dark reason that we'll get to later, stay tuned. The average Russian spends about 35% of their income to cover their debts, which is a horrific figure on its own. The average Tuvan, however, has to allocate an incredible 78% of their monthly earnings to paying off their debts. There is simply not enough work and therefore not enough money. If the average Tuvan wants to improve their life even by a little, they have to take out a loan if they want to buy clothes, a microwave, a fridge, things that the majority of people living in the Western world buy without even really thinking about it. People who live in villages and smaller towns who have an even worse chance at getting and keeping a stable job are often forced to take out loans to buy food. Moreover, a lot of Tuvans, including the people living in the capital of Kyzyl, live in horrifying conditions without water, sewage, or heating, which forces them to get more microloans just to live a somewhat normal life. In an interview for Radio Free Europe, one Tuvan woman explained that the people are, in essence, stuck in a vicious cycle as the region itself is too poor to provide the basic necessities for its people. For example, public transportation is abominable, and locals can't really rely on it to get to school or their place of work on time. There are no commuter trains, trams, or trolley buses, with normal buses being few in number and often breaking down. Therefore, if the average Tuvan wants to go to work, they have to take out a loan and buy a cheap car, then spend the majority of their wages from said work to pay off the insanely high interest rates on their car, which they just got to get to their place of work in the first place. It's like all the aspects of life in Tuva have turned against the people who live there. Because of this, the only industry that's actually doing well in Tuva is the micro-lending industry, with obscenely high interest rates of 1% per day. Very soon after taking out a loan, most Tuvans see almost 80% of their wages eaten up by interest rates. Now, living in one of the world's most god-forsaken places, without access to standard social services such as healthcare and education, relying on odd jobs and unreliable government welfare to survive, all while being hunted by debt collectors, sounds like a horror story, and such a lifestyle, it takes a toll on the human psyche. Because of this, a lot of Tuvans are of poor mental health, to say the least, and in their weakness, they turn to alcohol and drugs. We're not talking about let's pop to the pub and watch Arsenal kind of drinking. We're talking about drinking yourself to sleep in front of a grocery store kind of drinking. According to the head of government of Tuva, at least 3,000 residents of the 300,000-strong region were diagnosed with alcoholism in 2012, and it's presumed that there are dozens of thousands of undiagnosed alcoholics. While researching this topic, we even came across a 20-year-old article dated April 2025 saying that 65 people died of vodka intoxication in the first 4 months of the year. When it comes to official stats, alcoholism peaked in Russia in 1992 with 162 cases of alcoholism per 100,000 inhabitants. The fall of the USSR apparently breaking many Russian hearts. The Tuva region averaged 143 cases in the same year. In 2010, there were 108 cases per 100,000 inhabitants in Russia, and Tuvans beat the national average by about 7 cases. The situation is somewhat better with drugs, but not drastically. Russia documented 17 cases of narcotic substance abuse per 100,000 residents in 2010, with Tuva documenting close to 6 cases. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, however, that number was insane, averaging between 40 and 55 because there was a lot of drug trafficking in the area and the substances were simply too available to be ignored. Either way, Tuva has one of the highest rates of alcoholism in the entire country, and the drinking is more apparent in underdeveloped areas with lower employment rates, partly motivated by depression. In an attempt to provide for themselves and their families, a lot of Tuvans simply turn to a life of crime. The primary job available here is that of a debt collector. One ethnic Tuvan woman said that debt collectors called her night and day, threatening to kill her family if she didn't pay off her debt and telling her to literally sell her own kidney if she had to. If debt collecting isn't your thing, maybe you thought about drug trafficking. Well, someone in Tuva has, and it was quite trendy in the early 2000s. They apparently smuggled in drugs from China by mixing them in with bath salts, and the police in Tuva, being as corrupt as any drug dealer, it's not hard to see why no one cared. Today, however, drug trafficking has taken a step back and allowed murder to take the stage as the headline in crime. Tuva is by far the most dangerous region in Russia, not only because of its isolation, lack of social services, and lack of business opportunities, but because you'll likely get murdered if you go there. In 1995, when the rest of Russia was averaging 30 homicides per 100,000 inhabitants, which is pretty high on its own, Tuva averaged 137. That's almost 5 times the national average. In 2010, Russia averaged 6, and Tuva 25 per 100,000. And that's a record low for the region. For clarity, Mexico averaged 24 and 26 homicides per 100,000 people in 2023 and 2022 respectively, which means that Tuva's least murdery years are on par with Mexico. There are several factors that contribute to the sky-high murder rate. Aside from the drug trafficking, which is bound to attract a crew of nasty people who aren't afraid of resolving their differences with blades, rampant alcoholism also plays a role as booze lowers inhibitions. Something else that should be mentioned when discussing alcohol is tolerance. We should preface this by saying this is all based on rumors, but according to a lot of Russians, as well as some ethnic Tuvans online, Tuvans have a very low tolerance for alcohol. Now, nobody's ever tested this. It's actually questionable how legal and ethical it would be to put a bunch of people of different ethnicities in a lab and have them drink brain-killing liquid to see if there's a genetic correlation to alcohol tolerance, but even some Tuvans say that it doesn't take the average Tuvan man a lot to become intoxicated. The general feeling of depression helps a lot too, as a lot of people in the region feel as if they have nothing to live for. There is also a popular stereotype about Tuvans in Russia, saying that Tuvan men always carry a knife with them. Except it's not a stereotype, it's true, as knife carrying is a part of the culture. A knife is an obligatory part of a traditional Tuvan man's outfit, and it's one of the traditions that they adhere to this very day. So, if you put a bunch of drunk, depressed, armed men together and create a crime-run society for them to live in, murder is gonna kind of become a constant, isn't it? Perhaps the most damning factor when it comes to the rampant crime rates is the lack of police presence in Tuva. The police force is under-equipped, poorly educated, lacking strength in numbers, and most importantly, incredibly corrupt. Many murder cases remain unsolved because the police get paid not to solve them, and in some cases, the police themselves are involved. If you found yourself in a place with no business prospects, ridden by crime, with a clear lack of living and social infrastructure, surrounded by alcoholics and criminals, you would probably look for a way out, as did many Tuvans. The issue is, it didn't go the way they expected. The Republic of Tuva leads the Russian Federation in recorded military deaths per 100,000 people, according to an article from 2022. According to MediaZona, out of the 6,219 Russian military casualties from September 2022, 94 were Tuvans. For every 100,000 people in Tuva, at least 29 have been killed, which means that the number of homicide victims in Tuva is only overshadowed by the number of war casualties. Throughout the first stages of the invasion of Ukraine, the official Tuvan government website regularly posted casualty updates, while they also publicly posted detailed lists of volunteers that were sent to the front. Then in September of 2022, those updates suddenly ceased to exist. To this day, nobody knows the exact number of Tuvans that have been sent to the front. According to some journalists, it's likely that we're looking at a number between 2 and 4,500 Tuvans, which is between 0.6 and 1.4% of the entire Tuvan population. It's also known that at least 600 men have returned home, but the status of the remaining soldiers is unknown. Tuvans gladly joined the military when, in 2015, the 55th Separate Mobile Artillery Brigade, the Black Snow Leopard, was established in the region. The primary reason ethnic Tuvans joined the military was because of financial stability. The monthly wage of 45,000 rubles and upwards was, and still is, incredibly difficult to secure in the region. Nobody, however, expected that they would actually be mobilized in just a few years. Aside from professional soldiers, the Republic of Tuva also sent volunteers to help invade Ukraine. Several groups ranging from 30 to 50 men were sent in 2022, with the government organizing patriotic marches. The level of patriotism might seem illogical given how little Russia cares for Tuva, but some Tuvans are incredibly brainwashed. According to Medusa reporters, there are Tuvans who say that Putin is the reincarnation of Genghis Khan, and Sergei Shoigu, a native of the Tuva region, is a reincarnation of the Mongol warlord Subutai. Some activists believe that the brainwashing was easy because Tuvans largely didn't have their own opinion on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, so they just accepted the first one that was offered to them. Denazification and preemptive strike being the common buzzwords there. Most importantly, however, Russia offered a way out of poverty to Tuvans. They were convinced the invasion would truly be a quick special operation, and for them, it was a way to make a quick ruble without too much effort. Instead, they've now been stuck in a war for years. The injured men return home with a 3 million ruble compensation, which they often spent on alcohol, once again returning to the toxic circle of addiction, crime, and despair. So, is there a way for Tuva and its people to get out of this hell? Perhaps a way that doesn't include war casualties. Well, according to Vladislav Kovalyk, acting head of the Republic, the main priorities are solving the problem of transportation, reducing the energy deficit, and forming a new economy based on basic budget-forming industries that actually contribute to the region's local economy. Only time will tell if the region will actually see this kind of development. Thank you for watching.